Go ahead, Jim.
All right. Well, KJ, like always, I'm going to introduce you as an activist, a scholar, a podcaster, a educator, an international expert, and what else?
Journalist.
Oh, a journalist. Yes, absolutely. And I could barely hear you there, so test your mic again.
Testing. Can you hear
Good.
me?
Yes.
Yes,
That's
that's
good.
great.
Okay.
So I hope that was adequate. I'm going to also try and find our show that you were just on about 3 weeks ago, and I'll put that in the chat for because just sometimes you can't get enough KJ.
Okay. So I'm honored to be with you, and I will share my screen. So the key thing I want to highlight, which Jerry asked me to focus on, is that we are moving towards war with Iran. And that war is not a good idea, as we might imagine. And one of the key things that we have to remember is that this war could very, very easily go nuclear. And the reasons for that are the neocons have wanted war with Iran since 1997. This is the project for a new American century. Essentially, after the end of the Cold War, they decided that they were going to reset the planet, remake the planet in their image, and that they were going to use limitless war in order to engage in that. And they said that they would knock out 7 countries in 5 years. So this is the famous or infamous Wesley Clark memo. We're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. And I'm actually going to show you the clip where he says that, because I think it's important to actually see it. Seeing is believing, if you will.
9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me."
So, as you can see, these people are insane, but they've had this plan. And I want you to note how many of those countries have we already knocked out on that plan?
Libya, Iraq.
Yeah, and we're partially, and we've gone to war with all of those countries. So
Syria.
Iran is the only one standing, essentially.
Well, half of Syria, I mean, they didn't overthrow the government there yet, but they have about half of it, right?
Yeah, half of Syria.
Occupation.
half of Syria, and Libya is gone. Somalia and Sudan are active wars. And so we're looking at Iran. Okay. Now, if you know anything about Netanyahu, you know that he wants war with Iran. They've just recently signed this ceasefire deal with Lebanon and Hezbollah, although we don't know the details yet. Everybody's spinning it. But Netanyahu has specifically stated that the ceasefire is so that they can focus on Iran. Now, the other thing to understand is Iran does not trust the West. There's been a total breakdown of trust. Iran does not want war, but the pro-West liberal factions have completely lost favor in the government because the US reneged on the JCPOA. The liberals, the moderates, they, put all of their credibility on the line to make the JCPOA work. And when the US simply pulled the plug on it, they lost all credibility. And so right now we have much, much harder line factions controlling the government in Iran, not to mention the fact that the continual escalation by Israel makes things very, 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 very dangerous. Now, Iran sees a genocide on its doorstep. That genocide has delegitimated all Western institutions and all negotiations with the West. Still, Iran is trying to negotiate. But the key thing to note is that Iran has changed its view on nuclear weapons. Originally, there was a complete and total ban, a fatwa, against development of nuclear weapons. They weren't even doing research on nuclear weapons. Later, research was authorized, but no production or testing. It seems that that also has been rescinded, and there is possibly preparation for the production of nuclear weapons. We see that in the fact that they've just recently declared to the IAEA that they're going to put 6,000 new centrifuges into use. And these centrifuges can refine up to 90%, which means that they're capable of nuclear breakout within weeks. And they've also shown that they're capable of delivering a nuclear weapon through Israeli air defenses, which, they've shown the proof of concept of that. So again, further escalation, further risk. Now, according to Scott Ritter, during the first Trump administration, they actually prepared for nuclear strikes against Iran. They specifically had very concrete plans involving a 700 kiloton weapon, either a B-2 bomber that would drop a B-61 gravity bomb, or a W-76-2 tactical nuke. So the concept is that if the US goes to war, or Israel and the US go to war against Iran, there's very, very much there's a very, very high probability that Israel will be using nukes. In fact, that the US or the Trump administration will encourage Israel to use nukes against Iran. And of course, Iran is currently preparing for this possibility. This could result in possibly 100 million casualties. But we know that Netanyahu is desperate. And we also know that he cannot win a conventional war. US could not win against Iraq. There's no way that Israel can win against Iran unless it escalates to nuclear war. So things really have fallen apart. Russia and Iran are supporting each other. Currently, Russia has not delivered, as far as we know, nuclear technology to Iran, but they could. And there's a real fear that Iran could formally withdraw from the NPT, as could Russia. We can see that precedent in the fact that Russia no longer sanctions North Korea, and it accepts North Korea as a nuclear power. And of course, we know that the IAEA has been abused and weaponized against Iraq and against Iran and against North Korea. It no longer has the legitimacy that it is supposed to have, if it ever had it. And currently, regarding the JCPOA, we have to remember that the contract says that if any party is not in compliance, the other side cannot comply. And this was put in. The US urged this language because it wanted to be able to have a sanction snapback against Iran. But what the US, when it was drafting this treaty, didn't understand was that the US is capable of withdrawing, which it did. The Trump administration withdrew from the JCPOA. The EU is currently not performing. And so we have a non-compliance snapback by Iran. It is currently enriching. And then we can also add to this the current escalation that is happening. So if you recall, on October 26, about a month ago, Israeli fighter jets launched 3 waves of attacks targeting Iranian military assets. This was after Iran had fired 180 ballistic missiles at Israel in response to Israel's killing of Hassan Nasrallah. So when this attack happened, Netanyahu said that they were specifically targeting Tehran's nuclear program and that there was a specific component that they had hit. But they said that its ability to operate here have not been thwarted, which means that there are more attacks to come. So this is very specifically targeted against Iran's nuclear capacity or potential nuclear breakout. And what that simply does is it puts more pressure on Iran to accelerate even further and faster. Just to go back over the history, remember, Iran did its first direct attack on Israel with 300 missiles in drones in retaliation for the attack on the Iranian embassy compound in Syria that killed several top commanders of the IRGC. What Iran showed was that its missiles could penetrate Israeli air defense. Israel responded a limited attack on a missile defense system in Isfahan, and Iran chose not to respond because they considered it to be too trivial. And then in July, Israel assassinated Hezbollah commander in an airstrike in Beirut. And then the Hamas political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was killed in Tehran. And then Israel assassinated Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. And then Iran launched 180 ballistic missiles at Israel. And so we see this constant escalation up the ladder. And of course, Iran now has informed the IAEA that it is going to install and operate 6,000 new centrifuges to enrich uranium in Iran. And it is currently holding talks with the EU in Geneva over this, and they have agreed to continue diplomatic dialogue. But at the same time, Iran is absolutely incensed by the behavior both of Trump, Biden, and also the EU. And so Iran's deputy foreign minister said they will continue diplomatic dialogue, but they have also said the EU should abandon its self-centered and irresponsible behavior. The EU's complicit behavior towards the ongoing genocide in Gaza leaves it without moral authority to preach on human rights on anything. And on the other hand, Netanyahu has said that he would do everything to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon if after Araghchi warned that they could end its ban on developing a nuclear weapon. So there's threats going around all around. Now, the thing to remember, I hate to be blindingly obvious, but there is no such thing as a little nuclear war, a limited nuclear war. It's like saying you're a little bit pregnant. It just doesn't happen. And if it's okay, I'll show a little bit of this simulation, which you may already be familiar with.
U.S. submarine-launched ballistic missiles from west of Norway start striking Russia after about 10 minutes. And Russian ones from north of Canada start hitting the U.S. a few minutes later. The very first strikes are high-altitude EMP attacks, frying electronics and power grids by creating an electromagnetic pulse of tens of thousands of volts per meter. The next strikes target command and control, as well as nuclear launch facilities. Land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles take about half an hour to arrive. Major cities are targeted, both because they contain military facilities and to stymie the enemy's post-war recovery. Some cruise missiles take hours to reach their target. Each impact creates a fireball about as hot as the core of the sun, followed by a radioactive mushroom cloud. These intense explosions vaporize people nearby and cause fires and blindness further away. The fireball expansion then causes a blast wave that damages buildings, crushing nearby ones. The United Kingdom and France have nuclear capabilities and are obliged by NATO's Article 5 to defend the US. So Russia hits them too. Firestorms engulf many cities, where storm-level winds fan the flames, igniting anything that can burn, melting glass and some metals, and turning asphalt into flammable hot liquid. But the explosions, the electromagnetic pulse, and the radioactivity aren't the worst part. Nuclear winter is, caused by the black carbon smoke from the nuclear firestorms. The Hiroshima atomic bomb caused such a firestorm, but today's hydrogen bombs are much more powerful. A large city like Moscow, with almost 50 times more people, can create much more smoke. And a firestorm sends plumes of black smoke up into the stratosphere, far above any rain clouds that would otherwise wash out the smoke. This black smoke gets heated by sunlight, lofting it like a hot air balloon for up to a decade. High-altitude jet streams are so fast that it takes only a few days for the smoke to spread across much of the northern hemisphere. In the meantime, Earth gets freezing cold, even during the summer, with farmland in Kansas cooling by about 20 degrees centigrade or 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and other regions cooling almost twice as much. A recent scientific paper estimates that over 5 billion people could starve to death, including around 99% of those in the United States, Europe, Russia, and China. We obviously don't know how many people will survive a nuclear war. But if it's even remotely as bad as scientists think, then it has no winners, merely losers. Easy to feel powerless, but the good news is that there is something.
Okay, so I'm sure that was really depressing, but sometimes you just have to bite the bullet. I'm sure some of you have seen this before, but let me continue with. So, as I said, we are very, very close to war. There's a kind of continuous tit for tat escalation. The centrifuges are going to be restarted, and the EU and none of the parties to the JCPOA, certainly the West, doesn't have any leverage over Iran at this point. And so the key thing to understand is that this war is not going to be limited, because Iran and Russia and China and North Korea are all interconnected. The US and Israel are not going to get a free strike on Iran. It's just not possible. And if war goes nuclear over Iran, I assure you that it will spread out very rapidly to tactical and then strategic strikes all across the planet. Certainly, Russia will be pulled immediately into it. Russia and North Korea have a mutual defense treaty. North Korea, if Russia is attacked, North Korea has to respond. North Korea has nukes. That will also implicate China, and we will see a massive escalation very, very rapidly. Now, we know already that there has been the authorization of missile strikes, ATACMS, Storm Shadows, into Russia because the INF treaty was abandoned. The Russians have responded with the strike of a hypersonic missile called the Oreshnik, which, according to experts, is the equivalent of a tactical nuclear strike. So the Russians have just gone up the escalation ladder, and this changes the strategic calculus. They're showing that they can do something that has nuclear strength without it tipping over into the nuclear threshold. But we have to see how the West responds to that, because will they back down? Will they seek parity? Will they escalate further up the nuclear escalation ladder? There's a man called Dr. Herman Kahn, who was the model for Dr. Strangelove, and he did this work at RAND where they theorized the end of the world, or how to win a nuclear war. And essentially, Kahn came up with 44 steps on the way to Armageddon, that there is a very distinct ladder of escalation. In fact, he's the person who coined the term escalation ladder, and he said that there are 44 steps on the way to Armageddon. And so, there's the first is the hardening of positions, there's a show of force, significant mobilization, lawfare, harassing acts of violence, and then dramatic military confrontation. This is when the boat is rocked. And then we start to run into intense crises. So nuclear war is no longer unthinkable or impossible. There's massive escalation. There is usually large conventional war or conventional actions. And then we see large compound escalation, which we're already seeing in the Middle East and in Ukraine. And then there is conventional war. And then we start to see nuclear ultimatums. We've already seen these, the change in nuclear status and the threat to use nuclear war. And then we see a spectacular show or a demonstration of force. We've already seen these, possibly justifiable counterforce attacks, and then worldwide embargo blockade. We're already at this stage. And the point after this is nuclear war. So I'm not going to bother you with all 44 steps, but I'm just pointing out that if we think about Khan steps, we are very, very close to nuclear war. So time is of the essence, and at the same time, despair is not an option. We do have to take this very, very seriously and do everything we can to de-escalate and to stop nuclear war.
So I guess it's time for some Q&A, and if you have a question for KJ, please go down to the bottom and click on reactions, and then click on raise hand, and then that'll line you up right in order, so that I can make sure everybody gets picked in order. So I did have a question for KJ. Are you looking forward to January 20th when Biden leaves?
Am I looking forward?
Yes.
Is anybody looking forward? I don't think there's anything to look forward to. I think that we're headed into even more chaos. Whether that chaos, what the result of that chaos will be, is very, very hard to say. Certainly, the Biden administration has been a catastrophe. Now, will the Trump administration make things better? From the current pick of his administration, he has packed his administration with neocons. So there is the neocon continuity. So it looks like things will continue as usual. Certainly, he will support Netanyahu in further escalation in the Middle East. The only question that remains is, will Trump be so wrapped up in his domestic agenda and his personal vendettas that that will render him ineffective in his what passes for foreign policy? That remains to be seen. So there is a tiny there is a tiny glimmer of hope that he might be so wrapped up in fighting internal battles that he might be ineffective. There's also the chance that internally there will be pushback against anything Trump is trying to do. So that could create friction. And the third piece of it is that when a Democrat wages war, there is not much outrage. But when Trump wages war, it's easier to rally anti-war action. And so, that's the tiny silver lining on that current situation. But I'm not looking forward to anything at the current moment. We're at a very, very dangerous and, frightening moment in history.
Mm-hmm. Greg.
Yeah, I wanted, are there, to your knowledge, in any of these countries, people sort of in the wings who we could call adults who might step in and slap somebody in the face and say, wake up, we're gonna destroy the world?
Well, the Iranians have been very, very measured. I mean, I would have to say that they've been incredibly patient, incredibly measured, relative to the US and Israeli rampage. So I think that if there is an adult in the room, it's the counterparty, which we cannot, which we do not have much influence over. So I really think that the focus for us in the United States should be focused on our own leadership, not that we should, tell other countries what to do or tell other leaders what to do. But I think that we should focus on the, people that we're technically supposed to have some influence on, which is our own leadership. So that means reaching out to Congress people, reaching out to, people who are amenable to influence, putting out information and educating people. Anything and everything we can do, I think this is very, very important for us to engage in. The thing is, if we try to act and we try and act together, we might make a tiny difference. And at this point, every little bit makes a difference. If we don't do anything, we could face catastrophe. And even if we don't face catastrophe, this constant looming threat, in the face of constant looming threat, if you do nothing and if you're paralyzed, essentially you're setting yourself up for trauma. Trauma is when you don't take action. That is the essence of trauma, when you're paralyzed inside the moment of fear and apprehension. So that's why it's so important for us to reach out and to connect and to take action.
Jerry.
Yeah, thank you, KJ. It's a great presentation, although certainly sobering. There's a lot of talk right now going around about the possibility of nuclear war. You just see, at least it's on more and more people are aware that there is that danger. I mean, Newsweek just came out with a report showing how many people would die in each major American city, which, of course, millions. But most of that concern has been focused on the escalating war in Ukraine, leading to nuclear war, and less awareness, I think, of the possibility of the war that's going on in the Middle East, especially a U.S. and Israeli war against Iran and how that could become nuclear. Now, for the first time, I heard that such a war that Israel is planning to use nuclear weapons, and you said actually that the U.S. is pushing or encouraging Israel to do
This,
so.
this was
I'd
under
like
the
to know
Trump
more.
administration. This was under the Trump administration, according to Scott Ritter, and I trust that he
Okay.
has sources on this, that there were very clear and definitive plans to urge Israel to do a nuclear strike on Iran. And, there's specific munitions that they had actually considered. What the current administration's position is unclear, but what we have to do is we have to watch what they do, not what they say. And we can see
Right.
that been facilitating the genocide all the way through. We also know that Israel is losing the war. That's why it had to retreat and sign a ceasefire. It is reaching the limits of its conventional capacity. So when an army reaches the limits of its conventional capacities, but still has the urge and the desire, the intention to wage war, then we have to assume that nuclear escalation is one of those possibilities.
Mhm. Could you say a little bit more about Israel's nuclear capabilities or and
Well,
their nuclear posture?
Well, I'm not an expert on Israel's nuclear posture and nuclear capacities. All I know is that that it exists, that it is very, very aggressive, that is certainly far in excess of any of its neighbors, and that it will most certainly be facilitated by the United States. If Israel goes to war against Iran, the U.S. will be right there with it, just as it is with the current genocide.
Peter.
Hi. Oh, what an honor. Um, I have something that's maybe it seemed like a little out of left field, but I watched the footage that was briefly uh, around on the impact of the Russian hypersonic missile. And I was deeply astonished. And I'm thinking that it actually technically renders nukes obsolete because it shows that the Russians, for example, could take out all of our nuclear facilities in about an hour. And there's nothing anybody could do about it. So I think that that is a game changer, and I think that I've heard that Iran has that kind of missiles. They could obliterate Israel if they were not so restrained. So right now, I think that Putin is one reason that we're all still alive. And I think that this really could be a game changer. But we have a lot of crazy people in charge. And they've been in charge since at least the Bush administration. Judge Napolitano has resurrected some lost interviews that are fascinating with the veterans for the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity. Well worth revisiting. I remember those times well myself. But let me stop talking. What do you think?
I agree with you, and I also disagree with you, Peter. I think it's a very good point. What you make is the Oreshnik hypersonic missile really is a game changer. As I can tell, as far as Ted Postol at MIT can tell, it really seems to be something which is fundamentally different. And what it shows is that Russia can escalate up the ladder to something which is near nuclear, which is the equivalent of a tactical nuclear weapon, without actually using nuclear weapons with the radiation and the fallout, etc. So that really is a game changer, and it should signal to the West or to Ukraine that further escalation is pointless. That what we need to do at this point is everybody work towards de-escalation. And you can see that the Russians were very, very measured in their deployment of this new weapon. It was deployed inside Ukraine. It was deployed directly at a military facility, a weapons manufacturing facility, and they gave warning of what they were going to do before they did it. So it was a very, very measured, calibrated signaling, which is a good sign. But whether that signal has been received remains to be seen. I don't get the impression that the EU leadership and the US has really accepted or acknowledged the fact that, that the situation has changed. And I think they will simply continue to escalate further, in which case Russia will escalate further. And next time round, there will be less warning or no warning. It may directly hit into command and control. It might hit directly into Kiev. It could hit military NATO installations in Poland or anywhere else in Europe. So this is a very, very dangerous moment, and the potential for escalation is extraordinary. What you can tell is that nobody in Ukraine or in the West has reported back on what the damage is. And so that tells you that damage is quite extraordinary. It is probably of a bunker busting level, and that they don't want anybody to know about this, because if it was ineffective, as they claim, we would be seeing pictures nonstop of it. Okay, so
I think the silence is telling, and with I do have friends in various places, and I think that if the Americans are not completely dysfunctional and in the hands of lunatics, there are voices of sanity in the belly of the beast, and they will be paying close attention to this. So I have hopes.
I agree, Peter, but the other thing I want to point out is you seem to think that this would disable the US nuclear deterrent. And
oh no,
remember,
I think that deterrence is an obsolete and now distorted idea, but I think it just means that there is technically a possibility that a nuclear armed state could be disarmed physically by this kind of weapon.
That's the piece that I disagree with, because remember, the US nuclear forces are a nuclear triad, right? So they would not be able to knock out submarines, and not be able to knock out planes that are already in the air. So,
okay, well, let me get out of the way with all my speculations. Thank you very much.
All right, Alice.
I don't know where to begin. I'll begin with Israel. We let them have nuclear weapons. We are so particular about everybody. We will empower. They are our guard dog in the Middle East, and they have our nuclear weapons, and they could bring down, like that Samson story, they could bring down the whole house if they're losing completely, because they're totally nuts already, how they're behaving in Gaza. I mean, I'm Jewish. I mean, for Jewish people, this is incredible that we're doing this genocidal Holocaust on our brothers who have the same father. I mean, it's just so awful. I mean, if you're talking about anti-Semites, the Arabs are Semites. So, let's... The other thing is, Iran, they are very practical, and so is Putin. Putin is the hero on the planet right now. He has been so restrained. I read all his speeches. He's talking very softly and telling us we have to be careful. And I think he's waiting for Trump. I really think he's going to do everything he can to wait for Trump. And Netanyahu and Biden are going to do everything they can to speed him up, not to wait for Trump, because Trump does want to make a deal with Russia on Ukraine, not on Israel. I mean, Trump actually started the trouble in Israel by moving the capital to Jerusalem. That made Hamas nuts. That was the reason they attacked. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but we have to be very creative. I love what World Beyond War is doing now. We're all writing to Elon Musk, who's in charge of efficiency. and we're telling him where he can cut nuclear weapons, Star Wars, and we're trying to, like, he should get 1 million letters from us of being, if he wants to be efficient. In other words, you've got to come from some new angle that's going to change the conversation, because we're getting nowhere right now. That's how I feel. We're like very stalled, and I think we have to figure out how to make the most of Trump. He's going to be the president. I mean, at least it's not that horrible post-Cheney. He had a whole team from Bush Cheney advising him, Biden, on foreign policy. Who the hell needed that? And Trump, the broken clock that's right twice a day. I mean, he knew there's a deep state, that there's doing stuff that's undemocratic, to him anyway. So I don't know, that's my thought. And also the Kennedy assassination, we should be talking about that a lot. That's like very pertinent now, because that's another thing Trump wanted to do. He wanted to declassify the Warren Commission. We should be demanding that. Mm-hmm. We should be demanding that, because he wanted to make peace with Russia, Kennedy, and they killed him for it. Literally, that was why he was assassinated. And they won't. And the guy, I didn't even know this, the guy that was the head of the Warren Commission was the CIA director that he fired. In other words, the whole thing was a put. He fired the Allen Dulles because he wanted him to bomb the crap out of Cuba instead of making the deal that Kennedy made to get our missiles out of Turkey if they would take theirs out of, it was all secret. Anyway, we're learning a lot more about history than we knew before right now, and we better figure it out somehow. I'm glad we're talking. I don't know the best thing, but we have to think about a few good things that we can get together on quickly and start moving on.
I'm going to suggest people, one of the things I think people should do, and you can do this in groups. Yes, that's a great book, The Devil's Chessboard. And there's also JFK and the Unspeakable, which I think is also a very important book. But I'm actually going to suggest that you look up Iranian films like Where Is My Friend and The Runner. There's just an extraordinary cinema that Iran has put forth under extraordinary difficult conditions. And this is something, this is a little anecdote which you may or may not know, but 60% of Iranian film directors are women. That's how much they oppress, their, creativity among women. 60% of the directors are women. And so I think that one of the things that we should start to do is humanize the Iranian people rather than see them simply as the other. I mean, how many of us know Iranians, have Iranian friends, know Iranian history, see the Iranians as anything other than simply the other, right? As an enemy or as the unknown other. So I think that's one place to start. And then the other thing to remember is, once again, the Iranians have been the adults in the room. They have gone through massive war in the Iran-Iraq war, which the US provoked and wanted them to both kill each other, as Kissinger said. Kissinger said, it's a pity that they both can't kill each other off completely. But they lost, 1 million, they lost 1 million people in that war. 1 million people died in that war. At the end, towards the end of the war, they were so out of troops that they had to send children into battle. So you have to understand that Iranians are very, very slow to war. They do not want a war, but they will not let themselves be genocided the way that they see happening in front of their eyes in Palestine and in Lebanon. That they will not tolerate, and they will fight back. And this is why at the highest levels they are starting to change their nuclear doctrine. They're removing the fatwa against the development and possibly even the use of nuclear weapons. So we have to be very, 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 very much aware of this.
Just a quick follow-up, Anthony Donovan, who's on our call, posted an amazing interview with an Iranian a high official. I forgot who he was, but maybe definitely exactly what you're talking about now.
Mm-hmm. So,
Um,
Dan,
and
Yes.
say, let's come back to Anthony too. Tell us more about that. But go ahead, Dan. You've been waiting a long time.
Yeah. Good to see you, KJ. I was listening this morning to Scott Ritter, actually, and Ray McGovern and others talking about uh, that we've never been closer to a nuclear war with Russia right now, and based on Ukraine and the idea that Biden has sent ballistic missiles that they can actually hit targets in Russia, and therefore Putin has basically uh, 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 put the nuclear uh, retaliation on high alert. So what they're saying is it was really important. And one of the things he said is, as Alice was saying, that Trump would probably work to have peace with Russia, and that Scott and Ray were saying that because of that, Biden and their war hawks are basically pushing for to escalate that war. And that's the real danger. They were even worried that we might not see, the day after Thanksgiving. So, I mean, this is pretty frightening in putting that forward. And now, and then similarly, the idea that Netanyahu and Israel would start they basically said they would attack Iran if it was moving up its nuclear capabilities. So they've said that up front. And as you said, I mean, I'd like to hear what you have to say about how close we really are and whether the Biden administration is working hard to create this possible escalating this war before Trump gets in.
I think that possibility is very, very real. And I also don't believe that it's Biden because I don't believe
Right.
Biden is sentient anymore, if he ever was. This is, his national security advisor and Anthony Blinken and other neocons around him. Remember, Biden has surrounded himself with 18 neocons from the Center for a New American Security. That New American piece is very similar to the Project for a New American Century. It's essentially a continuation or these are the neocons. Their address is 1700 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is to say that they're closer, to the Oval Office than some of the bathrooms inside the White House itself. So they're so deeply connected, and these are the people that really, really want war, and they believe that they can win nuclear war. This is the danger with them. The US nuclear doctrine originally used to be what was called mutual assured destruction, MAD, which is also technically referred to as a counter value doctrine. That is value for value. You knock out, a city, we knock out your capital too, etc. Somewhere in the early 2000s, but even before then, the US started to develop this doctrine that it called counterforce. And counterforce is a very complex way of saying that we can win this nuclear war if we throw a nuclear sucker punch. If we throw the first punch and we throw it fast enough and intensely enough, we'll have air defenses that will knock out the other remaining missiles. And, we'll see maybe 10, 20% destruction, but we will survive and we will come out ahead. So this is literally the nuclear doctrine of these neocons. It's a counter force doctrine. It's essentially a nuclear sucker punch. We can win if we escalate faster, sooner, and fire off our nuclear weapons first. This is literally what we have in place right now. And so then is the Biden administration trying to keep Trump from de-escalating by pushing up the threshold and making the Ukraine war something that cannot be resolved? That's very possible. I think there is a very, very real possibility that that is the case. Trump has signaled that he wants to de-escalate in Ukraine. Once again, you look at what they do, not what they say, and you also look at who they have. Now, currently the message is mixed because he has some people in his administration that he wants to appoint that seem to be not so much Ukraine hawks, but you also do have some Ukraine hawks in there as well. So it's a very mixed message that we're getting right now with the personnel. And then as far as what will happen over the long term, remember, the really, really scary thing is that the neocon agenda is US global hegemony. And the question there is the neocon agenda believes that we will wage war in order to maintain our hegemony. And that war means war with peer competitors, and it also means, very likely, nuclear war, starting with tactical nukes. They believe that tactical nukes are not really nukes. We can get away with that. But of course, that's a miscalculation because there will be immediate escalation. The difference between the Trump neocons and the Biden neocons is that the Biden neocons believe that China is the main dish and that Ukraine and Russia is an appetizer. And originally the idea was you're going to polish off the appetizer and get straight to the main dish. That didn't happen because the appetizer turned into flounder and they got the bone stuck in their craw. And so they've been struggling with that. But the Trump neocons believe that you polish off the main dish, which is China, and then you cycle back to Russia, which is dessert. So it's simply the difference between dessert and an appetizer. It's not really a difference, really, ultimately in philosophy. That mindset of hegemony is still the same. And so we're just looking at sequencing, really, if we look at the big picture. But currently they're bogged down with Russia in Ukraine. They don't quite know how to get out of that situation. So it's very clear that the Biden administration and the Victoria Nuland faction want to finish off Ukraine because there's some real personal animus around it. They have real animosity against Russia, and some of them are actually from Ukraine. And so there is that desire to polish that off. At the same time, that if you look at things realistically, Ukraine is lost. Russia has won the war. And it's not simply that they won the war because of technology or attrition, simply that the US has not waged a war with a peer competitor in decades. It has never won a war with a peer competitor. And US war doctrine has shown to be completely ineffective. That is to say, US has this war doctrine called air-land battle, which it developed for war against the Soviet Union. That doctrine of war, air-land battle, was actually derived from the Israeli war doctrine called Israeli war doctrine of the Yom Kippur War in 1973. That war doctrine is a kind of combined forces, joint arms maneuver doctrine, which assumes that the counterparty is not capable of electronic warfare. And so it has completely fallen down in Ukraine. The Russians have a different war doctrine that's called operational art, and it's been shown to simply devastate Ukrainian and NATO forces anytime they come up head to head. And so there's a foundational gap that has been shown in conventional war doctrine that it's pretty clear that the US will seek to overcome through the use of tactical nukes. So that is the danger. So it may or may not be that Biden is trying to enmesh the incoming administration in war with Ukraine. But over the long term, the real issue is this neocon agenda of global hegemony. That's the thing that we have to challenge. Otherwise, we're simply looking at sequencing issues because they're still looking for war with China.
KJ,
Isn't
I
that
just
the
got,
reason we need to organize? I mean, it's one thing when we're looking at the possibility of nuclear annihilation, and we need to do things now. So how do we mobilize people? And one of the things is, I mean, VFP is trying to create a mobilization working group, but like I just said this or before you came on, I was listening to this program called Project Censored, in which there were a number of people that were talking from the labor perspective, the labor unions coming together to actually deal with ways in which they could confront stopping weapons going to Gaza, stopping arming nuclear weapons. All of these kinds of things is people are talking about it, but how do we bring all these different silos together to mobilize in a major peace movement to move these politicians or to get rid of them in one form or another? Do you have any ideas about mobilization?
I think we start out slowly, and where there's strength, we kind of slowly build out relationships, connections, and then start to leverage them. It'll be a kind of slow ink blot fashion. You just kind of build, and then through this kind of organic connection, you try and strengthen it. But it's very important you go for the places that are the most, where you can have the most effect sooner rather than later. And certainly the docks, the ports, the factories are places where you can actually have an effect. This is what I refer to as the pebble in the shoe. It's like you may not be able to take down a military, but if you can put a pebble in every little boot, that will slow down, the combat infantry person just a little bit. And sometimes that little bit is enough to make a difference. Right now, with the genocide on Palestine, if there were massive strikes in the docks, that would significantly change things. And I believe that some of that has already happened. But at this point, every little bit matters, and slowly build out relations, but look for those kind of pressure points where you can leverage a little bit of effort and still have a significant or meaningful effect.
KJ, I want to make sure Anthony gets to follow up on Alice, but as far as another little pebble, I'm surprised that the Republicans are not coming out more energetically against what Biden is doing, because Biden's trying to, it's pretty clear Biden's trying to rope Trump into a problem. And so should we be calling our Republican Congress people, like in Tennessee, because that's all we've got, should we be calling our Republican Congress people and saying, how come you're letting Biden do this?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Any Congress people that you have contacts to that you can reach out to, I think you should definitely do that. And you simply point out the stakes, the stakes. I mean, seriously, I believe that, there is a group of the neocons that believe in the rapture. And for them, the end of the planet is actually a welcome thing. And I believe that if you believe in the rapture, or if you believe in Armageddon, that is actually a conflict of interest, that you should not be holding office, because, your job is to prevent the end of the planet, not hasten it. But there are these people. I do believe that there are crazies, and then there are other people who are simply kind of caught up in the Kool-Aid, and there's a groupthink that's going on, and they believe their own lies. They are high on their own supply, right? They believe that a nuclear war is winnable, and that the U.S. is prepared and equipped to win it, and they believe that that our exceptionalism will prevail regardless. And so I think that that kind of craziness has to be lifted up and unmasked, and then you reach out to anything and everybody that you can reach out to and get the message across, and you build solidarity. I'm going to give you 3 images if it's helpful. I don't know if anybody has seen a cashew tree. Do you know what the largest tree in the planet is? it's a cashew tree and it's like 10 square miles. And the reason why it's 10 square miles is underneath the ground, its roots have intertwined. Okay. So that's the work that we need to do. We need to kind of intertwine our roots so that we have this kind of incredible strength that draws from the ground and everybody else, that we're interconnected, that, you know, VFP is working with World Without War, is working with Code Pink, and those connections have to be deep rooted and connected in a really profound way. That's one of the steps. The second thing, I want you to think of a pebble in a shoe. Is there a pebble that I can drop in a shoe somewhere that will slow down the march to war? If you can, think about that. And the other thing is, think about where can I, you know, I don't know if anybody's done Tai Chi, but there's an exercise called push hands where you're in contact and you're sensing for the other person's center of gravity. And if you get their center of gravity and you are deeply connected, then you can unbalance them. Okay, so you want to look for that center of gravity. During the Vietnam War, there was something very powerful that vets did and peace activists did, where they went directly to the center of gravity. And that was when they encouraged vets to not fight, right? To go to Canada, to be conscientious resistors, etc. And in doing so, the peace movement took out probably somewhere in the range of 100 divisions out of commission, right? 100 divisions were taken out of direct action because there was so much defection from the military. I think that we need to prepare for that kind of mass mobilization, anti-war activism at the heart, at the center of gravity of the war machine. Currently, what they're talking about bringing back the draft because they anticipate war with China or a peer competitor could result in 21,000 casualties every week. 3,000 casualties a day. They're currently retraining medics to do industrial level triage rather than the kind of artisanal, medical support work that they've been doing because they expect these mass casualties. And this is language that's coming from the highest levels of the deep state. And so because they're making those preparations, we as peace organizations and as vets and as former vets and allies have to also make similar preparations to prevent that kind of mobilization. If we can prevent that, then we're unbalancing the machine at the core, because at the end of the day, the machine still runs on people.
Okay. Anthony, did you want to follow up on what Alice was saying?
No. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay. Well, no, I wasn't volunteering myself, but because KJ, I really deeply appreciate everything you've said. It's been a great presentation. I can add a few things, but I don't want to detract. But yes, I've been to Iran. Yes, I did meet with the president of Iran recently. He definitely wants dialogue. He doesn't want war. And yes, I tried to interview the vice president recently, and he sent me a statement instead, which I tried to pass around. And thank you, Veterans for Peace, for passing that around. They definitely want war. We need to push back. And you're absolutely right about the neocon agenda. I mean, I deeply appreciate everyone that's on this call. I know we're doing everything we can, especially the Golden Rule, whose entire purpose is to bring awareness about our nuclear weapons system. And the things mentioned tonight, writing Elon Musk. Yes, I did that, Alice, to say, let's cut out the trillions we spend on nukes, and to read JFK, The Unspeakable is excellent. I dear JK, it's powerful to watch Iranian films is a great idea. I went on a binge a decade ago, and they are tremendously creative. People need to understand the tremendous Iranian culture. So just thank you. I do want to mention that we have this summit that most of you know, this Nuclear Deterrence Summit in Arlington, January 27th through the 29th. where all our labs, our Pentagon, everyone involved with nuclear weapons gets together in one place. Harvey knows very well on this call, and so does Jim. It's a really horrible thing where everyone gets together, pats each other on the back, they renew contracts. And I love that's one thing we can do is really do our best to tell people about it, stand up and go down to DC and just stand in front of that and surround that hotel and say, not in our name. It's just preposterous and horrible what goes on there for 3 days, pushing us to build faster and more at every chance we can get. That and supporting our TPNW, which everyone on this call knows, but that's a great treaty. We have to keep pushing that. We have 74 countries that have ratified it. Let's keep magnifying that. But no, thank you. This neocon agenda, I don't know all the suggestions you said and the little pebbles we'll keep trying to put in there. Yeah, so just thank you. I think most of us since the 70s have been pushing against this nuclear weapons. And I really woke up when I found out in 2010 that Obama went ahead and renewed the contracts for building new nuclear weapon facilities. And that's what I spent the next 4 years of my life dedicated to this documentary I did on that subject, because it blew me away. I was like, what are we doing? So anyway, thank you, KJ. What are we doing? It's insane. We're pushing war. We're on the verge, as you said. Just thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for your brilliant efforts and your deep conviction and courage and commitment. I mean, I think that, that is extraordinary. And I look forward to hearing more about your work and your, engagement. One of the things that I do want to point out is when the neocons prepared to remove the US from the INF for almost 2 decades. And that was a very, very deliberate plan. And then it was recently done. But that plan was happening over at least 15 years. And of course, we know that, the thing about the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty was that an ICBM, traditional ICBMs take, 25, 30 minutes to launch and to hit. And so that gives time for communication, and then it gives time for potential deconfliction or de-escalation. When you remove restrictions on intermediate or short-range missiles, then it means that there is no time for response. Essentially, if something goes up, you don't know if it's nuclear or not, and you have to use it or lose it. And this is the danger. And the US is planting these intermediate nuclear weapons all over the planet. They're going to place them in Ukraine, certainly in the Middle East, and certainly all along the first island chain. They're going to give them to Taiwan, to Japan, Okinawa, etc. So this incredible escalation where nobody has time to think. Nobody has time to communicate. You just have to instantaneously respond. That is one of the really, really dangerous escalations that we have seen in recent years. So, but I also want to point out that, there are good things happening in the world, right? The world is moving towards multipolarity. The countries of the global South are knitting themselves together in a bloc that is not warlike, but is built on win-win cooperation. And it's almost like, it's, as Mao said, you're encircling the cities from the countryside. It's a kind of a knight's move that is knitting together most of the global South together in peaceful cooperation. This is positive. Like Saudi Arabia and Iran have built relations now, and Saudi Arabia has warned Israel not to escalate. So, there's some significant shifts that are happening on the large-scale geostrategic level, which are very, very promising. But what we have to do is we have to prevent the world from surging over into nuclear catastrophe. If we can prevent that, the short term, then we have a chance over the long term for really a much, much better world.
All right, Greg, you put your hand down, and Jerry's got his hand up.
Did you have something, Greg?
No.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna, KJ, this has been an amazing and really important presentation. I'm sure you've given us a lot to think about and to be even more aware of how close we actually are to the possibility of a nuclear war, and but more specifically, what kind of actual plans are in the works for a nuclear war, and how easily that could happen in several different theaters, including Israel, Iran, including Ukraine. So I'm going to try to move us in. We have about 10 minutes left on our normal hour and a half. We could certainly go a bit over that, but I'd like to kind of move us towards a discussion of what we can do and what we want this Veterans for Peace Nuclear Abolition working group to be doing in the near future. And it seemed like a number of things came up in our discussions, and that includes humanizing the Iranians. So I think that's a really important point, and Anthony has been working hard at that. And so people-to-people efforts we could be thinking of. We should maybe be talking with some other groups who might want to co-sponsor an Iranian film festival. For example, we might be talking in the coming year about the possibility of people-to-people delegation to Iran, or if possible, bring in some Iranians to the U.S. Of course, we already have some Iranians here, so getting to know the Iranians is something we can certainly do. Beyond that, we have the whole challenge, and what this working group has really been doing for, almost 3 years now, I think, is educating ourselves and others. And about the danger of nuclear war, and looking to make common cause with others. We're still kind of, I would guess, uh, evolving from just education into more action. And we've been trying to figure out, how to take stronger action. So a number of ideas came up in the pre-meeting. We have the coordinating committee always meets a half hour early in these monthly meetings. But we invite everybody else to join us. We make it open. Today it was a little different. We didn't make a point of inviting people. We probably should have. But anyway, we came up with a couple good ideas, I think, for us to consider. And one is, it's already been on our plate to have a larger webinar along the lines we just had today. I'd like to invite KJ back and pair him with one or two other powerful speakers. We've talked about possibly getting Scott Ritter together with KJ, which would be really interesting. We'd have to find somebody else to mellow it out a little bit. Um, but so we were hoping to do such a webinar as early as December 5th, as of our last meeting. We, and I should say, I wasn't really able to move that forward yet. But I propose that we find a good date in January, and that we have such a webinar with KJ and possibly others, and that we approach warheads to windmills, we approach Back from the Brink, we approach the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, see if they want to co-sponsor the webinar with them, so we can make it a bigger, more outreach, and also just carry out an act of networking to start to build what kind of tree was it? A cashew tree. Quite tried to become
Yes.
a cashew tree. We need more united action. There are so many groups doing their own little things, including us. We need to at least once in a while do things together and So those are a couple ideas, and then there was one other. And we thought, well, at this time when everybody's increasingly alarmed about the possibility of nuclear war, that Veterans for Peace should have something publicly to say about that at this time. And so we might want to issue a statement. We actually thought maybe Veterans for Peace, possibly in conjunction with others, should ask for a meeting with President-elect Trump or President as after January 20th to discuss our concerns about nuclear war and how the current conflicts in Ukraine, the Middle East, and the planned war against China are all putting us at great risk. So, I wouldn't expect Trump to meet with us, certainly, but who knows, that would be wild. But just the publicly calling for such a meeting, I think, might have some impact. What do you think, Ken Mayers, about some of these ideas? Maybe you have others.
Well, actually, I want to backtrack just a little bit for a minute, and I lost the connection, so maybe somebody has already, excuse me, covered this. The point that Alice made that Anthony, I don't think, mentioned in his response was a remarkable short speech by Javed Zarif, former foreign minister, now vice president of Iran, that Anthony posted on his Facebook, and I've just put that link in the chat.
Great. Oh, yes. That was a very remarkable speech. It's only about 7 minutes or something like that, right?
That's right. That's right.
So I haven't heard a better statement for peaceful relations from anybody in a while. So I would really highly recommend listening to that. And we'll share that around some more, Anthony, I'm sure with your blessing, right? Okay. So shall we go ahead and organize such a webinar, hopefully in maybe mid-January? Look for the best dates and approach a few other possible speakers and invite KJ back and make that as try to get a few hundred people, which we've actually done before in some of our previous webinars. Several hundred people have been on. So shall we go for that? Everybody agree?
Yeah, yeah.
Let's do it. Okay. What about the idea of talking to the VFP Executive Committee and working with them to the board, that is, to fashion a statement, possibly directed towards President-elect Trump, possibly asking for a meeting. But we'll kick those ideas around.
And I think
we've also
KJ just
we also
put in the
talked about
chat.
making a statement and addressing the American people is another option, but Trump might get calling for a meeting with Trump might get more attention.
KJ, did
Sorry.
you recommend calling for a meeting with Tulsi?
Right, she's the State Department.
Would you say that again, Jim?
Well, KJ put in the chat, meeting with Tulsi Gabbard.
Right.
Oh,
So,
yeah, why
that
not?
might be doable, actually.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
would like us.
yeah, actually, might be. Okay, so those are some ideas we will continue to explore. And then it'd be interesting, Anthony and others might want to start talking to some people about an Iranian film festival. Maybe something that could travel like the Iranian Film Festival does.
We're
So
already talking.
what's that?
Yeah, with the DU group, Damasio is already talking with them about getting that out to other places. Iran, I think, is one place he was talking about, but also in Hawaii.
You're talking about the Iranian Film Festival. I'm talking about an
I thought
Iranian
you were talking
film
about the
festival. Yeah,
nuclear film.
right. Okay, well, those are some things for us to work
Yeah,
on.
one
Any
more.
other ideas?
One more.
Alice?
I just want to add one more. I want to really put this out. I put it out at the beginning that we all generate as many letters as we can to Elon Musk, who's in charge of efficiency,
Mm-hmm.
to be
Okay,
efficient
calling
and get rid of
cutting the
nuclear
military budget.
weapons. Yeah.
It couldn't be anything more
Not
efficient than
not
that.
just the nuclear weapons, the military budget, the bases, the
Mm-hmm.
armies, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It might appeal to him.
Right.
He only wants space, you know. We don't want to get rid of space. We just want to get rid of everything else, you know.
It's worth a try. You know, the military and defense have the largest number of employees. So if he was serious about cutting the budget, that's where he should start. But the fact that this Department of Efficiency has two heads tells me that they're already starting from the wrong place.
Already it's not efficient.
Right. Well, I see some of our friends from Seattle are here. Dan Gilman with the Seattle Veterans for Peace, actually now called the Daniel Ellsberg chapter, and Mary Hansen, longtime anti-nuke activist. And of course, they both live fairly close to Ground Zero. Ground Zero Center for uh, uh, Nonviolent Action, which is right next to the Bangor Trident submarine base, more nuclear firepower than anywhere in the country. So perhaps they might have I'm inviting you, Mary and Dan, if you have a word or two to say, and anything that's working in the Northwest that we might consider.
Well, Watching Against Nuclear Weapons here in Washington State, connected with PSR, it's a project of PSR, are planning a regional convention on nuclear weapons. And I've been to one of the planning meetings, and I've missed a couple that I couldn't make, but we will be in the next couple months getting down to specifics on dates and time. Well, we actually have a date. It's April 11th and 12th, I believe, for the convention. It'll be in person here in Seattle, but I understand they're going to try to film it, video it as well. But we can, as we get into the planning and get down to the specifics, we can let this group know what's being planned and how you might contribute to this convention that we're planning.
Sounds great. I'm hoping I can be there. Hi, Mary. Got anything for us? Any words of wisdom?
Thanks, Hollis, for letting me know about this. Yeah, it was really good to be around people who are thinking about this. I think that my first thought, which has been my thought for quite some time, is that looking at how you function with this level of trauma is a really important thing to look at. We just had a Fellowship of Reconciliation here in Western Washington. We just did an event on that issue, and I wouldn't say we have answers, but just that we have compassion for people who are frozen, not because they want to be frozen, but because the human being is not designed to function well under this chronic fear level. I mean, to have a fear level this high and have it last so long. So I just want to appreciate all of us. I look at the brick wall behind KJ during the Cuban Missile Crisis. All I can remember now is how a particular brick wall in my high school looked as we were leaving to go home, and we thought we might never come back. And I think it's something that those of us who are older remember, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and so we have a reference point that younger people don't have. So I really hope that we can have some compassion for the fact that people are frozen, and come up with some ways in which we can thaw that fear to some extent, because I think that's really in our way. I don't think anybody wants a nuclear war, really. It's just that fear that when they don't have an idea of what to do, then that the default setting is numbness. So I'm glad to be here among those of you who choose not to be numb, and thanks very much.
Thanks, Mary. Wise words indeed. Well, KJ, how about we give you the last word and then we wrap things up and stay in touch and plan for our fourth Friday meeting in December again. We usually meet on the fourth Friday, so let's take a look at the date on that and start planning for the January webinar and the other activities we've put on our plate. KJ, do you want to have some final words for us?
Yeah, so, just kind of picking up from what was said, what Mary said, I think that it's really, really important, of course, to have empathy, but also for us to take action, some kind of action. If you start to take action, you'll realize that that creates its own momentum. And if you take that action with other people in coordination, then you'll see that you can go much farther. As they say, if you want to walk far, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together, right? So start to reach out, start to take some kind of action. And it's that simple, small action that will help you get out of that freeze response. It is true that the response very often to trauma and threat is freezing, but that is a kind of animal response that, if you see a porcupine or a possum, it plays dead, then the predator may think that it's dead and just leave it and go its way. And it's actually a survival mechanism. So there's a kind of, biological logic for that, but it's not going to help us here. Freezing is not going to help us when we face, the kind of global threats that we face. So for us to make a difference here we have to take action. We have to move more into a fight mode. And that is important. It doesn't have to be Mortal Kombat, but it does involve getting your muscles moving and starting to do something. And I'm going to go a little bit further. I'm going to suggest that we not think of trauma, but that we think of oppression. Because trauma, when we use trauma language, which is very popular, what we do is we individualize things when we have to understand that both the threat and the response has to be collective. Okay, so don't think of it as trauma, think of it as oppression. And if we do that, then we can think of not individual responses, but collective responses. Also, the language of trauma makes us think that it is an event that is in the past. And I assure you, this is not in the past and it's not an event. It's an ongoing system. And more importantly, very often people tend to psychologize trauma. This is not something that's psychological, it's structural, it's political. So we have to challenge it on a collective level, understand that it's ongoing, and look at the structure and start to see what we can do to tackle and dismantle the structure rather than individualize it into a psychological past event. If we think of things in those terms and we understand the need to take action together, then we have a chance. And that's all that we can ask for at this point.
Thanks so much, KJ. I think those are strong final words. You gave us all a lot to think about, and we all got to get busy. This group has been a a blessing to all of us who participated for the last few years. And I think have been built a foundation where we can begin to take stronger collective action and network with a lot of others in the process, as you suggest. So, okay. Thanks everybody for being here. This is an outstanding meeting. And thank you so much, KJ. And we'll see you all next time. Keep on waging peace.